Hey there everyone, this is ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Well, you asked questions, and I've got the answers. I'll be going through each one at a time, but if you'd like to skip to a certain question or go back to something earlier, I'll be including timecodes in the video's description. And as always, I do apologize if you did ask something but I didn't happen to see it. With all that said, let's get to it. Kinasho asks, what people or works do you take inspiration from when you think of your script writing process, if any? I don't actually have a conscious person or style that I'm drawing inspiration from when writing a script. There are definitely some YouTube video essayists whose work I admire, but I am not actively trying to copy their style or use it as a template in order to do my own form of video making. But I suppose if I had to try and give my process some kind of root inspiration, it's that I would treat it like one of my lectures when I teach. Now, obviously, teaching a room full of university students is not the same style of writing or presentation that I would give a YouTube video, but the underlying philosophy is the same. I want to try and present the information in a way that is coherent for the listener, interesting as a general topic, and something that I genuinely want to talk about. That kind of enthusiasm does come through, even if unconsciously. I've said this before, but I think people are far more keen to tell when someone makes something because they're actually interested in it, even if things are a little rickety, rather than going through the motions to, quote, get something out there, unquote. What's your favorite anime or show in your most disliked genre? I don't really hate genres, but there are some that tend to give me a little more trouble than others in terms of being able to enjoy them. I mentioned this briefly in a video I made a while ago, but romantic comedy tends to give me the most disappointing or unhappy media-consuming experiences. I don't tend to find them either very funny or very aesthetically interesting, perhaps because the rather everyday setting allows for an easier time making storyboards or layouts, which manifests in a plain-looking final product. That said, one of my favorite anime of all time, rom-com or otherwise, is His and Her Circumstances, or Karashi Kanojo no Jijo, or Karekano from 1998. Directed by Ohno Hideaki, the same Ohno who directed Neon Genesis Evangelion, it is definitely a story told with his particular visual style. The chance is also more than likely that, if you like a romantic comedy of the past couple of decades, you've probably seen something that Karekano pulled off already. Major disparity of socioeconomic class between partners? Check. Comedically exaggerated anxieties concerning the natural awkwardness and relationships between people? Check. Putting on airs and how one carries oneself in the presence of students or each other? Check. Vanity as a characterization for at least one partner? Check. Characters having accurate insights into how the other feels but struggling to come out and say it? Check. Point being, I love Karekano, and episode 16 is on my shortlist of favorite anime episodes ever made. Mikal asks, what are some of your favorite games? I do actually have a backlogged account, which I admittedly don't update that much since my video game playing has undergone a major decline over the past couple of years. But my favorite games include Enemy Zero as a suspenseful horror, Nights into Dreams as a flying action game, Umineko, If Found, and especially With Those We Love Alive as visual novels, Nier Automata for action RPGs, MechWarrior 2 31st Century Combat as a war simulation, Command & Conquer Red Alert 2 as an RTS, Need for Speed Underground for racing, Soul Calibur 2 for fighting, and my absolute favorite game is Final Fantasy IX. What do you think is the maximum number of cats a person should have? Your answer to this will affect my opinion of you.
11d6.
Bay asks, do you have a personal blog site for your reviews? If not, can you make one? Until I started writing for Magical Stage, link in the description, I floated the idea of blogging for a while, either as a place to keep my work in case some great Annie-list crash happens, or just in case I wanted to rant or vent or have a little fun projecting some opinions into the internet. Writing articles has been a lot of fun, but I'm not 100% sure if a blog is a thing that people would take the time to read. I guess I could use some input on this. Would a ZNoteTaku blog be a thing that you'd check out, and what would you want to see on it besides reviews? What's your favorite all-time group watch entry? For those who don't know what this is referring to, I host weekly group watches in my Discord server, usually every Saturday afternoon, Eastern Standard Time US. There have been, at the time of this writing, 148 of these. We've watched some incredible stuff in them, but if you really forced me to pick, I'd say that it's a toss-up between Blood the Last Vampire, Angel's Egg, or Bobby's Girl. And if you want to look at things that are not anime, I have to give a shout out to Ralph Bakshi's American Pop and Havoc in Heaven by the Wong brothers. What's your favorite dessert? Cheesecake is my dessert Achilles heel. If I happen to be eating out at a restaurant somewhere and they have cheesecake as a dessert option, no matter how stuffed I am, I'm more than likely ordering it. There used to be a dessert place near my old apartment that sold cheesecake frozen yogurt, which tasted way better than you would assume, and also had cheesecake bits as a topping for your sundae. Needless to say, I went there a lot during the summer months. A shame that it's gone now. Marmaladas asks, what's your favorite female character from Mecha shows? Oh geez, do you have 20 years? This list would honestly take forever, so I'll try to limit myself to a few shows. I have to give a special shout out to Juri and Aoi from Infinite Revias, Diana, Kihel, and Sochi from Turn A Gundam, pretty much every female character in Evangelion, and Megumi and Yurika from Martian successor Nadesco. Throw in Izumi Noah from Patlabor too. Tobble asks, a lot, so let's go through these one at a time.
What's up, Doc?
Nothing much. Which incarnation of the Doctor are you? The one that's not going to give you any extra credit at the end of the semester because you already blew all your extra credit opportunities. Well, sad as it is to say, despite being an ardent lover of science fiction, I have not watched more than maybe 2 or 3 episodes of Doctor Who. My mother has been trying to get me to watch it for goodness knows how long, especially since we grew up as a family that had science fiction as a mainstay of our entertainment, with Star Trek, Lost in Space, The Iron Giant, the Godzilla franchise, and The Day the Earth Stood Still in our house, among others, right alongside the Disney films. Is there an area, section, topic, or niche that you think more people should explore in anime discussion, or discourse, or essays online, YouTube, anime ranking sites, social media, blogs, etc.? Honestly, more general education about the anime industry and how it works would certainly be nice. That's part of the reason why I made my Anime Staff Explained video in the first place, especially since many videos that have a day-in-the-life glimpse felt overly sanitized and didn't explain or present some of the potential problems very well. But one thing that I think should be discussed a little bit more is seasonal watching. I don't necessarily mean that in terms of which seasonals to watch, but more about how seasonal watching functions as a means not only to watch anime, but also to navigate anime discourse and the personal sense of what is good versus what is poor. A topic like that is extremely broad and could cover about 100 topics, but I'd like to see the behavior of seasonal watching be put under the microscope and question whether it's actually a good thing or not. But to head off any potential questions at the pass, no, I do not think that seasonal anime viewing is somehow connected to warping one's brain, or that watching the backlog is the magical cure to this. There's plenty of absolute garbage in anime's backlog that has been buried for good reason. What are some older anime you would recommend to younger or modern anime fans? Anything for different genres like isekai, rom-com, action, etc.? Or otherwise just stuff of historical significance? Oh geez, this is a major topic. Again, do you have 2 hours? Well, I have a list on my AniList profile called Anime That Changed Anime, which points to things that are artistically or narratively significant, so that can be a good starting point. I would also recommend at the very least that people start exploring fantasy during the earlier decades of anime, both in film and other formats. Things like The Weathering Continent, Visions of Escaflowne, The 12 Kingdoms, Legend of Crystania, Magic Knight Rayearth, and the OVA version of Magic Users Club, just to name a few. Some of these are isekai as well, and it's genuinely fascinating to see how a warped to another world story plays out before the genre became so oversaturated with job gimmicks, stat tracking, and harems, just to name a few. Is there a relatively new face in anime that you think more people should keep an eye out for? Ueno Sota, the director for both Days with My Stepsister, which I did not like, and Shiboyugi, which I kind of liked. Ueno is a director who is approaching anime direction less from an anime perspective and more from someone who is actively trying to reconcile the restrictions that the media places upon storytelling both visually and narratively. The result is material that is, if nothing else, presented in a way that is markedly different, and in an industry which seems to be increasingly homogenized every year, Ueno stands as a figure who is on a trajectory to oppose such paradigms. Are there any anime staff members whose catalog of works stand out to you as interesting or noteworthy? Well, there's one that comes to mind immediately, but I won't reveal who that is because I'm writing a script about them and their own history and work, so that'll be coming at some point. Hopefully you won't find it too extra or a test of survival. That's your hint, by the way. What are some underrated anime dubs that you think more people should check out? Well, I'm more than positive you wrote this question because I had you watch My First Girlfriend is a Gal dubbed.
Now to turn this half-assed gal into a grown-ass woman.
Unfortunately, I don't tend to be that fond of dubs, but there are at least a few that are genuinely worth checking out. Aside from some of the staples that everyone talks about, like Ghost Stories, Bacano, Cowboy Bebop, and the like, the dub for Martian successor Nadesco is hysterically funny, particularly if you've watched the original dub for Neon Genesis Evangelion and can recognize the inherent humor of Spike Spencer voicing Akito, or Akido as they say in the dub. There's also Convenience Store Boyfriends, an absolutely horrible anime that's a meme among me and my friends for several reasons, one of which is because the dub is golden.
Damn it.
You gotta love an anime protagonist who calls his love interest class rep for about 98% of the show rather than by her name. What are some anime that you hate or didn't like that still managed to have something interesting in a positive way? Like good music, interesting concept, good animation or production, etc. The nice thing is that even for the anime that I have pretty strong negative feelings about, there's usually something that I can gravitate towards that makes the experience of watching it worth it. Onigamiden, or Legend of the Millennium Dragon, is a movie that has among the worst protagonists to grace an action spectacle, but the general sense of compositing and animation is honestly decent enough that you're better off just watching isolated clips on the Boru instead. Nana 7 of Sevens is a pretty crappy series production-wise, though it did give us microwaves causing science mishaps several years before Steins Gate. But the show as a whole is just so dopey with its situations and MIDI ragtime music on the soundtrack that I can't bring myself to dislike it. There's also Brain-Powered, the most Tomino Yoshiyuki thing that Tomino ever Tominoed in all its good and bad connotations. Surprisingly thrilling emotionality at times, but also has some gender essentialist philosophy and treating its women more as props for the male characters rather than being truly self-actualized presences within the narrative. Kano Yoko's music being a pure highlight is definitely something the show has going for it, but I feel like I'm being condescended to the whole time that I'm watching the characters and their frayed emotional logic being implemented in ways that bounce off me like rubber. Favorite Pokémon game? Pokémon trading card game on the Game Boy Color. A blast to play even after all these years. But if we're talking mainline games, I've always had a soft spot for Pokémon Silver since that was my first entry, but I also quite like Pokémon Ruby. Can you do a falsetto?
Yeah, sure. I had to do falsetto exercises in music school, so it's not awkward for me or anything like that. And yeah, I know it sounds like a Mickey Mouse knockoff, but hey, that's just how it sounds. What can you do?
Das asks, what is a question you'd like to ask your viewers? Much like Bay's question before about a blog, I guess what I would want to ask is, what kind of stuff do you want to see? Do you prefer longer form content, short form content, the stuff that I've generally been doing, or something completely different? I don't tend to get many comments on the stuff I produce, so I can't tell what people are actually thinking. Medley Notes asks, what are some of your music pet peeves, whether it's performing related or teaching related? There are some sillier ones, like grimacing every time the Star Spangled Banner is sung in 4/4 time rather than 3/4 as it's supposed to be, but one thing that does genuinely bother me, especially when going to a live performance, is not being able to adapt properly when the microphone system is on the fritz. I've been to the theater a lot in the past several months, and while I fully understand and have personally experienced a mic system failing in real time, you need to respond appropriately, not keep going at the same volume level like nothing happened. Not to mention, you should always perform assuming that the mics are not working. It is less risky to turn something down than it is to turn something up. Of course, when you're off stage, you need to behave like your microphone is always on, but that's another matter. I also hate the philosophy of you need to practice X minutes every day, that if you are not in the practice room, you are not making progress. As someone who did not adhere to this at all and still managed to receive a certificate in performance in undergrad, I can assure you that there are other ways to meaningfully practice that don't involve playing. Analyze your music theoretically, do your International Phonetic Alphabet transcriptions, perfect your literal and poetic translations of the text, consider any references in the text that might be contextually relevant like allusions to places, flowers, mythology, etc., and listen to recordings to understand how different artists approach the same music and use that to navigate your own sense of the piece. Singing it over and over again until you get it right, or playing it over and over again until you get it right, is not how you learn music. It needs to be a more encompassing endeavor. What's a vegetable you dislike or used to dislike? I used to hate spinach, but I'll gladly order it or have it with something. Same with broccoli. There are two vegetables I dislike either for taste or a strange biological reason. I've never ever liked pickles, regardless of what kind they are or from what part of the world they're from. I hate the taste. The other is carrots because I was actually born with a slightly misaligned lower jawbone. As a result, eating foods of certain textures is extremely hard because I can't really physically grind it into smaller pieces to swallow. I've tried every permutation of either carrot preparation or eating, and it seems like a battle my mouth just cannot win. The only way to properly align my jaw would be surgery, and needless to say, I've gone through my life this way with very few problems. I'm not going to have a surgery that, for the most part, does not impact me except for very rare circumstances. What's the gayest year of anime? Yes. Favorite Yuji Ohno work? Rest in peace. Indeed, rest in peace, Lupin III's musical king. I have to pick the OP theme for Lupin III Part 4 as my favorite track of his, as it's the one that I've re-listened to the most times. Shalom Printam 9124 asks, how did you get into research and your Ph.D? Is it something that you were attracted to, or something that you realized you wanted to do, or a means to an end? I got into my Ph.D. both as a means to an end and because I was inherently attracted to the subject. When I was an undergraduate student, I would often overload my credits on extra music history courses, as tracking the development of music in the quote-unquote Western world was something that I found endlessly fascinating. I realized that being able to study this subject even more in depth at the graduate level would be a natural fit. Do you plan on pursuing a traditional job role like teaching? Yes, absolutely. That's the other reason why I got my PhD. I loved teaching when I was a grad student and a hired adjunct, and I have always been at my most occupationally happy when I am in a classroom teaching students with a course I devised myself. I know that, especially in the arts, the academic job market is not exactly looking the most composed, but I also am not afraid. Time and circumstance will hopefully get me on the teaching path soon. And if not, there are thankfully some other fallbacks I have planned just so that I'm not wasting away doing nothing. But no, making YouTube a career is not one of them. I know this isn't exactly tied to the question you had asked, though you could consider YouTube a teaching role of a different variety, but I find the idea of YouTube as a job so thoroughly disinteresting and alienating. YouTube as a platform and its audience is too fickle, and adopting a make content every day or other such format would be basically making the content I find personally repelling. If I should ever make it, which I think people at large greatly underestimate just how big a following you need to make that happen, it would be purely supplemental, not the primary source of my income. Issy Market asks, what do you think about the new trend of actors performing outside of the Broadway stage, such as Evita and Sunset Boulevard? I am not a purist in the strictest sense, but I'm not warm to the idea of theater performers taking part in, say, film musicals unless they really, really know what they're doing. The giant exodus of performers to Hollywood during the Great Depression years were people who understood that the world of the stage and the world of the camera have their own requirements, both for acting and singing and dancing. This is why you can have people be so charismatic on screen, like Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, and Eleanor Powell. To be fair, a part of this is also bad directing, because more often than not, you sometimes get directors who make musical films as though they are ashamed of making a film musical. Tom Hooper's Cats adaptation, by trying to have uncanny realism, is one prominent example, along with some of the live-action Disney remakes. Understated Thoughts 1 asks, sorry if it's too late to ask stuff, but what's your favorite OP? So, I actually have an account on anime themes, and I have a completely disorganized playlist which contains some of my favorite OPs and a couple of EDs as well, either because they're musically fantastic, visually fantastic, or both. I'll include the link to that playlist in the video's description, but if I had to list a few off the top of my head, they'd be the OPs to Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, the recent Ikoku Nikki, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, Ashita no Naja, the Mobile Police Patlabor OVA, and Magic Knight Rayearth. Peter asks, what's your take on the 4 chords of pop? I guess you could say that my take on it is that, well, it's just 4 chords that by themselves don't mean much. But how a particular musical artist manages to use them says a lot about their creativity. Any artistic development is the result of working within specific confines, but voluntarily choosing to use only 4 chords effectively restricts an artist from being able to use other musical colors to explore whatever it is that they want to express. As such, certain things like the melody or instrumentation, or whatever effects you want to use, have to take on greater importance. And it's not as though other musical traditions don't have their own chord practices or restrictions either. The famous jazz standard I Got Rhythm, composed by George Gershwin, has had its particular chord progressions emulated time and time again, especially for improvisational purposes. It even has its own name, Rhythm Changes. Heck, Duke Ellington even used it for his own Cottontail. Prog Rock Dude asks, I don't see you talk about music too often here, referring to that specific Discord server, so what are some of your favorite artists and or genres of choice? I've actually already answered this in a prior Q&A, but I don't tend to listen to artists so much as finding songs or pieces that I like. For example, I love The Wall, but I wouldn't call myself a Pink Floyd fan, if you know what I mean. But what I can add to that answer is that I don't particularly have any gravitation towards one genre or another, so much as I have phases that I go through. As of this moment, my phase is that of the Great American Songbook, effectively going through nearly every jazz standard that I can think of. Just before writing this part of the video's script, I was listening to the George Gershwin album of piano rolls, particularly the version of Swanee that was included on that. I'll put a link in the video's description. But if you want a more straightforward answer to your question, musical theater and classical were the things that I studied in school and did research for both grad school assignments and my Ph.D. Musical theater especially is built into my DNA, having done numerous community and school productions over the years. Every time I visit New York City for family, I have to include a musical during the trip at some point. And that's all she wrote, folks. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you again to everyone for watching, commenting, subscribing, and following along with me on what will be my 5th year of doing YouTube content. I may not have a large audience, but I'm grateful to have an audience at all. Here's hoping things can continue into another year. In the meantime, this has been ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone!